This episode of Cheat Codes, a sickle cell podcast, was made possible by Global Blood Therapeutics and is intended for educational and informational purposes only. Visit gbt.com to learn more.
Welcome back, Cheat Codes listeners, for another episode of Cheat Codes, a sickle cell podcast. Dr. Callahan, how are you today?
I'm doing good. How are you doing, Dr. Z?
Fantastic. You know why?
I do know why.
I'm going to tell you anyway. It's because, there's certain people in our field who we recognize as important, who we recognize as prominent, right? But today's guest is a little more than that. Today's guest is kind of like a personal hero of mine too. He's everywhere, right? Everybody knows our guest.
And such a nice guy and so accomplished. I mean, I was trying to do a little research about what we could talk about today, and it's endless. So I think it's going to be a great discussion. Another great guest. We're really excited to talk to
Dr. Lakshmanan Krishnamurthy, who is the Section Director of Bone Marrow Transplant, the Chair of Blood and Marrow Transplant at the Aflac Cancer and Blood Disorder Center at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, Professor of Pediatrics at Emory University School of Medicine. My goodness, I am just so honored that you are here with us today.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, it's very easy. Both of you are heroes of mine. So I just love being here. And love talking to you. And I love the work you're doing. Getting to the community is a very, very big deal. So congratulations and kudos for the work you do.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I think that the best place to start always is at the beginning. Tell us a little bit about your journey towards medicine. Did you always know you were going to be a doctor? What drove you towards medicine?
Yeah, I decided in second grade that I was going to be a doctor because of a book I read. So I guess in second grade at the time, there was some expectation to read books.
I got some first graders. What's that book?
So, yeah, I thought that, it was, I was very moved by something I read in somebody who was a saint and a physician and who said it was a great way to serve humanity. And so, even though, my interests and skills probably lay elsewhere, I was going to be a doctor always.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Where does that story start for you? You were in India, right?
Yeah, I was born in India. I was an Air Force brat. So my dad was in the Air Force. I joined a very outstanding medical school, which is very, very difficult to get into. It was run by the military.
And this, of course, is the Armed Forces Medical College.
Armed Forces Medical College. And, it was like a very, very competitive to get in. And they paid my way and I joined the military. And I was basically on a track to be there for 40 years and retire as a 3-star general. That's what my classmates ended up doing. Wow. But it didn't go that way.
So could we call you General Krish?
Yeah, I have 7 classmates who were generals. Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay, so you started out there, and tell us a little bit about your experience at your time at the Armed Forces Medical College.
It's fantastic.
Tell us. Go ahead.
It's fantastic because, the military gives you a whole other side, or the meaning of leadership, because no other job is people placed under your command that you're responsible for them in entirety. And that's a lesson that they live every day. And the second thing is how you take care of patients is your patient is your brother in arms. Okay. So there's not that difference. So it's very personal.
Wow.
And so your patient's child, was your brother soldier's child. So those are very unique things, in the military.
Wow.
Yeah.
Those are gems. Mm-hmm. I love that.
Yeah, I never knew I was going to get that, but going there, I did that. Yeah.
So I want to keep in mind the sickle cell story that builds here. So at this point, had sickle cell crossed your radar in medical school?
No, not at all. 25% of the patients with sickle cell disease are born in India. Mm-hmm. There are so many people in India, you could do 25% and fill in the blanks for anything, right? because 16% or 18% of the world lives in India. And sickle cell disease, and is a very, I don't have a good explanation why in every part of the world it affects the most disadvantaged. And so it does in India. So you could grow up in a big city like New Delhi, like where I grew up in, or go to, do your pediatric residency in a big city like Mumbai, and maybe never see a sickle cell patient with these many sickle cell patients in the world, because it's in the hinterland and in these aboriginal populations, and, is where sickle cell is very common in India. I was doing a pediatric residency because I wanted to be a pediatrician, and that's what it was going to be. Really came across hematology, and I actually went to a hematology lecture where they talked about how, these inherited disorders of blood, like thalassemia and sickle cell disease, how genetic counseling can dramatically impact, people's decisions to have a child, or, how in Cyprus, they had pretty much had no more births with thalassemia. So I was very impressed by that, and I decided I was going to be a hematologist. And so that's how, I was already sort of going off in a different direction. And when I was in the military, I had a lot of time because, mostly your people are pretty healthy. That's why they're in the military.
Right.
And I would go on my own time and work at the biggest, research hospital in India, in New Delhi. And I really opened my eyes to thalassemia and sickle cell disease. And, the awareness is so much, even though, they don't have a concept of chronic illness in a society like that. There's a lot of stigma if you have children with chronic illness. But I could see the anguish and the desperation in their eyes. I would go in for their monthly transfusion, and they would pull up papers, published in the West, and say, do we have this drug available, for our patients? I don't know where they got this. Was before the internet, by the way.
So that's a lot of dedication to find those papers.
It was a lot of dedication. And, there was one patient that I would come back. I would see them every month. And every month he would say, so doctor, what is new since we last met? I was like, you're getting another unit of blood. Unfortunately, nothing new. But that was the level of desperation. And then I would talk to them. And they would say, so I'd say, so how are you doing today? He said, well, I have 2 children with this chronic illness. I am not fit to show my face anywhere. What better, that's a description of stigma.
Wow.
And then I keep on, in my youthful, pigheadedness. So one time this child was coming for transfusion, his aunt, his mother's sister came, and I said, so you're not married, so have you got screened? Have you got electrophoresis done? Sort of.
Yeah.
So the next time the child comes with the mother, and the mother says, so you're the doctor who talked to my sister? I said, yeah, I'm the doctor, And she said, you don't want her to get married?
Oh, no.
I was like, what did I do wrong here?
Oh, no.
That was a stigma about, there's awareness and there's stigma about genetic disorders. And I saw the anxiety, the distress, and the hopelessness. And so I decided I was going to give up this wonderful job, and I was going to go to the part in the world where they cured this disease and learn how to do it.
Wow.
So I just, with great difficulty, gave up my lifelong job, and we ended up in Minnesota. So,
wow.
So,
wow. Well, so that really sets the context for me.
Yeah.
So you end up in Minnesota, and that's where you do your pediatric residency and fellowship.
Yeah, I did my fellowship first because I'd already been working in hematology, and they said, well, you want to get certified, board certified, so do a year of residency and then stay on in the faculty. So that's how it all happened,
And this was one of the strongest transplant programs, and
was.
specifically around non-malignant transplants.
Well, they were really innovative. They did first immunology transplants. They did some of the first Fanconi anemia transplants. But, Minnesota at the time was 97% white. So they didn't have much in the way of sickle cell disease. And here I show up and say, my interest is in sickle cell disease. Yeah. There wasn't any sickle cell to be had, over there. I did basic science in sickle cell disease, worked in the lab. And so my program director said, how did you become a sickle cell expert? We didn't have any sickle cell to train you on. So they said that, another expert, anybody interested in sickle cell is not going to show up here. And you stay on here and start transplant for sickle cell disease. That was my first faculty job in Minnesota.
And then you started something that I think is becoming really of interest again, which was trying to get rid of some of the prep regimen, trying to get rid of some of the toxic stuff. And I think not very many people have early papers in the New England Journal, but years ago.
I was just at the right place at the right time. That the notion that this is sort of a slash and burn, bone marrow transplant. And so there were some early papers coming out of, how can we reduce chemotherapy for these patients. And so there was a reduced intensity conditioning. And then I think that because of it was a strength of the program that they could see even this young person had some potential and could guide us in a new direction. And so it was my privilege to have been there and to be part of the story of, advancing transplant a little bit in Minnesota. That was really a wonderful experience.
And so you were in Minnesota fellowship, then a little bit of residency, and then as an attending and doing.
I was on the faculty there for 3 years, and then I decided I didn't just want to be a transplanter for sickle cell. I wanted really to be a sickle cell doctor as well. That I really enjoyed that. Even as a resident, I realized that, we had a very few patients with sickle cell disease. But believe me, you have one patient or 1,000 patients. The problems that surround sickle cell disease are there in the exact same proportion. I don't need to repeat this for this audience, what all they were. And I found myself being the advocate with the few patients. So I realized that I really wanted to get into all of those aspects of sickle cell disease. And so that's why I, with great reluctance, decided to leave Minnesota and go somewhere else where I could build myself a sickle cell program. And because I ended up everywhere having to build programs, I was like, okay, this works for me. And so I ended up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Right.
Where it's a lovely place. I didn't realize how friendly and and a wonderful place it was. And they had a good number of sickle cell patients. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania supports newborn screening pretty well. So I could see that there was a lot of potential there. So I basically spent the next 13 years in Pittsburgh building the program, building my own, understanding that you can't do physical medicine without, behavioral health, integrating that, and that, we're all schooled in taking care of patients in the hospital setting, but people live in the real world. The only people who live in the hospital are people like you and I. Mm-hmm. We spent our entire adulthood there, and really was wonderful, when a parent came and said, I don't want other people to walk in the shoes that I'm walking in. What should I do? And I said, like one of my mentors had said, well, why don't you start a foundation? And, Andrea Williams started the Children's Sickle Cell Foundation. And, I had lots of collaborations with her and other community-based organizations. HRSA decided to fund sickle cell at the time. So for the next 12 cycles, we were funded by HRSA. And PCORI started funding sickle cell. We did that. And so I was always dividing my time between doing sickle cell, being the director of the sickle cell program, taking care of patients. And this was everything that I had learned in the military of all around care on the Air Force Base. That's how my sickle cell experience felt like, People, come to Western Pennsylvania for two things. They go to school, and they go there to go to jail. Did you know that?
No.
Because in the state of Pennsylvania, all the child and adolescent, sort of interning or jail type facilities were in Pittsburgh. And so I actually had a following in both of these groups. If people came to go to college, I would see those patients. And because these were the people who had so many things that were wrong with their lives, it was a wonderful experience to longitudinally follow all of those patients. Along the way, helped so many trainees. I had 14 genetic counseling students over that time. I had like people who, fellows who, Dr. Bakshi, who was just talking to, has been my, for 10 years we've been working together. So it was just a wonderful experience all around being in sickle cell and, understanding the patient voice.
We did try to steal you from Pittsburgh at one time to come be the boss here in Detroit, but you were too smart for that.
Yeah, it was but I got to meet guys like you. And so I've been a fan of Dr. Callahan ever since. So, yeah. No, it's
every time I see you, you have new trainees working with you. You always seem to be working with fellow or resident. They're presenting something at ASFO, at FSCDR, and it's great. I think that's how we keep the field going and get more people involved.
Yeah, I mean, it's because you took somebody like Amar Zaidi, in hand that we have a superstar like that. I think that we all owe this, right? I owe it to John Wagner, who decided, in Minnesota that this guy who keeps talking at the water cooler that we should be transplanting, sickle cell should really be given a chance. And so we're just passing forward, what we got from others. So it's been wonderful. And I had long since decided I wasn't going anywhere till my former boss from Minnesota, Bill Woods, called me one day and said, "You kept talking about wanting to cure sickle cell. Do you want to come and do this on a big scale or what?"
Wow.
That was the shortest sales pitch ever.
I don't know what's going on down there in Atlanta, but I saw, I don't know, every 2 weeks it seems like you guys get a new sickle cell doctor from somewhere coming down there, and tens of millions of dollars in funding. And I saw Dr. Lamb has a
oh my God, yeah,
$2 million grant or something. And Vivian Sheehan's. I mean, every week you have a new superstar.
So it's a powerhouse.
Well, so first of all, I think Atlanta is so well known for its historically Black colleges, right? Colleges and universities. So there's a very solid Black middle class in Atlanta. And having lived in Minneapolis and in Pittsburgh, it is a very different experience to see, and very gratifying. That given education, what can happen? Because a lot of these people came here, went to this college, and stayed on here. So that's very big. And so we also have a lot of patients because Atlanta is 50% Black. I think everybody knows Fulton and DeKalb. Suddenly these two counties that everybody knows about.
Yes,
we never thought that would happen. People actually migrate to Atlanta if you have sickle cell disease, in addition to people migrating to Atlanta. So usually the number of sickle cell patients that you have in a pediatric program remains static. It never changes because, when they come of age, you transfer them to adults, right? We used to have 1,700 patients when I came here. We are like 2,100 patients in the time that we have. Wow. So there's an active migration here.
That's 2,100 pediatric patients.
2,100 pediatric patients.
So that's got to be by far the biggest program in the country.
It is. And there are probably about 1,200 patients, adult patients, and we only have a part of Georgia. Augusta has, probably 800, 900 patients as well that they follow, in big parts of Georgia. So it's a very big population. And for some of the things that I do, they did their first bone marrow transplant 28 years ago. So we've done like 124 transplants. And so those people have seen how, transplant can make a difference. And so there's a very strong belief that people should be aware of their options. And if that is what they choose to do, then we have the facility to do that.
Wow.
So it's been a great environment to work here.
Cheat Codes is brought to you by our founding sponsor, Global Blood Therapeutics. GBT is a biopharmaceutical company committed to discovering, developing, and delivering life-changing treatments that provide hope to underserved patient communities, including sickle cell disease. GBT is grounded by a mission-driven culture and built with a team of experienced and passionate people committed to making a difference in the communities it serves. Cheat Codes is grateful to GBT for sponsoring today's episode and serving the sickle cell community.
One of the things that always intrigues me is, you're talking about the options that people have. And I always am intrigued by individuals like yourself who have been doing this, who have made such a mark in the area of cure. Mm-hmm. I always am intrigued by how that conversation goes. Like, I kind of sometimes wish I could be a fly on the wall when somebody like you is talking to a patient about cure in sickle cell disease and how you present that to patients. I wonder if you could give us a glimpse of sort of how you began conversations around cure in sickle cell disease when you talk to patients and families.
I think you have maybe 20 papers about this. Decision aids and educational materials and how to talk to patients. So really the world expert in this.
No, it's quite fascinating. It's one of the most fascinating conversations you can have for a variety of reasons. Well, first of all, you talk to the person to see from whence they come. Why are they here? And quite often I have to explain to them, I'm not trying to dissuade you or persuade you. I just want to know why. And that's where you learn what is actually going on in people's hearts and minds. So I spend, it takes about an hour and a half to 2 hours. It's not a short conversation. But probably the first 15 minutes is just trying to understand what you want. And some of what I hear are just, it gives me a window into what's going on in their life and their family and their soul. And some of what I hear from children is just enough to, make me cry sometimes. An 8-year-old can say things like, I'm going to die because of this, and I don't want to live like this anymore. To all the way to, I want to play football, and what kind of life is it if I can't play football? Well, I don't play football. My life is good enough for me. But for him, the fact that 12-year-old that he can't play sports, that he can't be with his friends, or that 14-year-old girl who can't, everything is fine, but I don't want to keep coming every month, twice, to get my blood transfusion and feel wiped out for 2 days. And the mother who says, this child is okay so long as I'm alive. What's going to happen after me? All my research is just listening to people, and tell them what it is that they want. So we really want to understand why. I can tell you, mostly people want to transplant because they're done living the way they are with what it is. But things are changing. So people now say, what is the quality of life? I had gone through much of my adulthood before I'd heard the phrase quality of life. But patients actually use the word quality of life. What quality of life is this? And then even in the 7 years that I've been here, now they say, I want to know all my options, which is such a change,
It's beautiful.
It's a transition. So somebody says you need to have your spleen taken out because you had splenic sequestration, or you have avascular necrosis and you need hip surgery. And they're like, while I am considering all my options, why don't I go check out this bone marrow transplant? Or they say your child is 9 months old, we're going to recommend hydroxyurea. And they say, while we're doing hydroxyurea, I think it's some sort of chemotherapy. We're going to go talk about that bone marrow transplant, which is also chemotherapy. I don't know if it's something to do with the demographic here, the fact that we offer transplant consult to anybody who wants it. So you don't have to have a donor. You don't have to be eligible for a clinical trial. You don't have to have any disease severity. If you want a transplant consult, we'll see you. And if you happen to be in the hospital, and they'll call me and say, Krish, you think you have some time this afternoon? We have somebody here getting a blood transfusion. I'll show up. Somebody's on the weekend. Say, can you come? They're admitted to hospital. Will you come and talk to them? To come back to your point, there's a lot of understanding involved because people have heard that transplant could cure, but they don't know what it involves. And there's just not enough time in a hematologist's office to learn all about that. When in Pittsburgh, I did both transplant and sickle cell disease. My sickle cell patients would say, okay, this is a sickle cell visit. We will set up a separate appointment with you to talk about transplant. Because between all the boxes you have to check off in sickle cell, TCD, your blood tests,
Right.
what hydroxyurea, all of that. There's no time to talk about transplant. So then you sort of have to start off from the basics. People don't know what exactly a stem cell is because they've heard that they're worried about it in Congress. And I have to explain to them that's a pluripotent stem cell. We're talking blood-making stem cells. What is a cell and what is hemoglobin? Because there's a lot of things that they've heard about since the beginning, but they haven't sort of totally, there are gaps. Then you start talking chemotherapy, and people's eyes start getting wider and wider. And I say to
Mine
them,
too.
yeah, that if you're feeling like deer caught in headlights, then you're paying attention. This is serious stuff, chemotherapy, and so we don't spare any details, not because we're trying to persuade or dissuade them, explain what it is. Meanwhile, if it's a lot of the time, the girl's already crying as soon as you hear about the hair loss. There's other children who are very sensitive. And so many times I do this with the children there. And sometimes the child says, am I going to die? And they're crying over there. But I think that we sort of try to put it in context that, you're going to be in the hospital 40 days, 10, 12 days is going to be pretty bad. You're going to be coming to the clinic quite a bunch, maybe 8, 10 months. But if I asked you a year later, you're going to be off your pain medicines, you're going to be off hydroxyurea, you're going to be off transfusion,
Play football.
You can play football. so this is a process. Mostly people leave shaken up because they weren't prepared for any of this information. The other part that happens is when we talk about fertility, because chemotherapy makes you infertile. For some people, that's the end of the conversation. One mother started wailing, literally saying, no, I don't want to do that. Or other mothers say, we want to have I want those grandbabies, or I don't want to make a decision for my child, about their fertility when they're children without their input. Second cancer, those are things that, so I think mostly people leave with, so we say, okay, we talked about all of this stuff, and here's a, sickleoptions.org. You can go look at it. You can watch videos, see what other people, real people's experiences. If you want, we can connect you with a family that has gone through this. So we go through all of that. And mostly, depends on where they are. Some people have already decided they're going to go for a transplant. It's already been thought about, prayed over. They've met somebody in the playground who used to have sickle cell disease, and they've decided. A lot of people, this is their first rodeo, listening to this, and they have to think about it and pray over it. And usually it's a fairly long process to, 6 months, 1 year, 10 years, to make a decision to go to transplant. So that's typically what the conversation went until about 2 years ago.
Yeah. We're in a new exciting time, a new frontier.
Yeah, so now we get a new breed of people. So they're like, we watched on 60 Minutes that you can get stem cell. And I'm like, no, it's gene therapy, but that's okay, Or my friend from Michigan called and said, don't they have stuff like that available at your place? Or we heard this in NPR. So that's a whole other piece, because people who had been thinking about transplant for the longest time, it wasn't an option, or there were no unrelated donor available. Suddenly, this gene therapy could be an option.
Usually, say you go through that whole discussion with people, and they're not scared off. The secondary cancer didn't scare them. The infertility didn't scare them. 40 days in the hospital and infections. And they still say, I want to be cured. then next step would be brothers and sisters look for a match, and that's your best choice by far.
Yeah.
Now, do you go after that if they don't have a match? Do you do unrelated donor transplants? Do you do cord transplants? Do you do haploidentical transplants?
Yeah. So all of the above. What we've tried to do, so if there is a sibling, a full sibling, then our sickle cell people have usually got an HLA typing. So almost always, if there is somebody, and so mostly all of this is the nurse practitioners and the hematologists in the sickle cell clinic who are the first point of contact saying, there is a sibling, why not HLA type them? And so often they'll come to us with HLA typing. I think the outcomes with especially young patients are excellent for matched sibling donor transplant. So, if you're less than 13, if you will, younger is even better. You have a better than 90% chance of being cured of sickle cell disease, which is a huge deal. Of course, it comes in the context of, pretty rough year and going through chemotherapy and all of the pressure on the family and things like that.
But when you get out the other side of that, though, you don't see a lot of graft versus host. Really, the kids are cured and mostly doing really well.
Well, so the younger the patient, the better they do. If you're 16, 17, 18, the risk for graft versus host disease starts going up. It's never a walk in the park. Anybody who tells you that have this transplant, it's going to be great, is just plain lying. It's a tough process, but you can break it down. You're going to be in the hospital. We say 40 days. We keep getting better. It's sort of a biblical sounding 40 days, but it's sort of more or less like that.
We're in Lent now. So.
Okay, that's good then. but it's even often much shorter, but 10, 12 days are really rough with mouth sores and fevers and nasogastric feeding and all of that. And then having to take medicines for 8 months, 10 months, 1 year. And there are complications that you expect and don't expect and stuff, but mostly you can come out at the other end. And mostly, we have a clinic called an Sickle clinic, for a clinic only for people who used to have sickle cell.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah,
very
cool.
Cool.
Yeah, it's a multidisciplinary clinic, and it's quite wonderful to go there.
Who's part of that Sickle clinic?
So one of our bone marrow transplant doctors, Dr. Ann Haight, actually started that many, many years ago. And then we have a hematologist who comes there, an endocrinologist who comes. We have physical therapists, and we're trying to get our psychologists to come. So a lot of the families, we actually have an active process of saying that, you think of yourself as a sickle cell warrior right now, but you have to train to be a sickle cell vet, a veteran, because there are people who came out of Vietnam in the 70s and who still haven't got over the idea that they were in Vietnam and all the tragedies. Sometimes your identity as somebody who's a parent of a child with sickle cell is completely wrapped up in that. And I've seen some heartrending situations where parents said, I don't know what to do with myself. I don't have a life anymore. I don't have a purpose in life anymore.
Wow.
On the other hand, when you do transplants, when people have chronic pain, I just had a call today from a patient that I transplanted 16 years ago. I hand out my cell phone number, so you can't be surprised why people call you, and she had pain and swelling and had gone to the hematologist, and it wasn't sickle cell, but it was chronic pain, just not had the rehab. And so a big part of it is preparing children to re-enter school, re-enter the workforce, have, to look forward for the future. So all of that also happens. But to go back to your question, so we have clinical trials open for half-match transplant, 7 out of 8 match unrelated donor transplants, match sibling donor transplant, a clinical trial for patients without severe disease, because a lot of patients say, why do you want us to wait till our child gets really sick? And then we have multiple gene therapy studies. So the idea is to have all the options available with the idea that, everything is not going to be right for everybody. And we want to make sure that the right option is available for the right person.
I have a question. Out of those 124 patients, we talk about infertility, but I imagine some of them have had children.
They have, but chemotherapy is very toxic. So we tell people that know that you're likely to be infertile, but behave as if you're not. Behave as if you're fertile. So it's premature menopause. Go ahead.
Where are we with fertility preservation, pre-transplant, pre-cure? I mean, do sickle cell patients have trouble accessing those types of resources?
Huge problem. It's a huge problem. So we have some foundation funding to do that. And even then it's difficult. All of our patients, like if they're young boys, there's a clinical trial in Pittsburgh. So I was like, I know where Pittsburgh is.
Yeah.
Just jump in your car and drive 10 hours north and you'll be there. And it's a 20-minute procedure, and they do a little needle biopsy under short anesthesia. And they actually save testicular tissue, even in pre-pubertal children. And so we're opening these trials here so that, the technology is moving forward that you can actually take, hopefully in the not too distant future, take immature testes, develop, actual sperm from there. Cincinnati has done a great job, doing ovarian, they just take out an ovary. And we're opening those kinds of same sorts of protocols here as well. You just have to figure out how to pay for these things, because if you bill it to the insurance, it's just not affordable. We work with our Reproductive Endocrinology Institute. So if you've attained puberty, then, they can stimulate the ovaries, collect a bunch of eggs, and freeze them away. Sperm banking is pretty straightforward for boys. But, sometimes even just being on hydroxyurea or just having a sickle cell, they don't have any sperm to bank. But the biggest barrier is nobody's talked to them about it. And so when you're having a transplant, if you talk to a 19-year-old, the last thing on his mind is preserving the human race by reproducing. That's not in his social calendar. And it may be very different at age 25. So I tell people that or the mother says, I just want to get rid of this horrible disease and I don't care about fertility. So in general, people don't care about fertility, when they have a serious disease until the day after they are cured of that disease. So you actually actively have to encourage people to do this. And there's a sort of an opportunity cost. You have an opportunity of doing this now because you can't go back and undo what you did. Even though there's going to be cost, the main cost for fertility preservation comes when you're trying to conceive with what you. So the technology is there. It's getting better. It's getting available to younger patients. Costs are still a problem. And, a lot of insurances just don't cover it. And a lot of centers are working to sort of roll in with other things like, the gynecologist will do the ovary operation at the time when they're putting the central line. So there are different ways of trying to minimize. There are people who are doing GoFundMe, to do things like that. So there's so many different ways to advance that.
Dr. Z, you're working on something like a national CBO-based operation to try to lobby for things around fertility preservation and sickle cell.
Yeah, so there's an organization that's being run by a patient advocate named Tiana Wolford, who had a failed transplant, actually, and has had quite a journey with infertility. She started an organization called the Sickle Cell Reproductive Health Education Directive that she founded with Kim Smith-Whitley, actually. And this organization is now just coming about to really get active in this area. So we'll probably, I work with them pretty closely, so we'll probably reach out to you and pick your brain a little more on that.
Yeah. I've recently been talking to Lakia Bailey, just about these things. And this is really important. And honestly, we have to think about this in the policy. Why would insurance not cover it? And so the way to think about it is like a mastectomy surgery. If you cover mastectomy, then you should cover implant, which is what they do. So then if we have a medical, oophorectomy, if you will, then really insurance should cover fertility preservation technique. Right. So it's only because it's a failure of advocacy, if anything else. So there's an opportunity for advocacy here.
So something I've been excitedly watching from afar is, non-chemo methods of clearing out the bone marrow for transplant. Are you guys involved in any of that? Do you think
This is really
that's
exciting.
future? Or?
It absolutely is. The problem with being a bone marrow transplant doctor is our frame of reference, right? So we say, yeah, compared to what we used to do, we're doing less. But our patient says, you're doing plenty. I mean, is this crazy to wipe out my entire bone marrow, put me in the hospital for 40 days, have all of this, and then I'm going to be infertile. It is crazy. That's why a lot of people don't want to do this, even though they could potentially have a normal life. So now antibodies are coming, right? So it's like a smart bomb directed at a protein on the surface of the blood-making stem cells. And it goes and targets just that. So it's happening in immune deficiency disorders. I think that the threshold for it to work in sickle cell is higher. So it's not something that's quite around the corner, because we've been discussing whether is this the next big thing. Almost the next big thing. We just need to develop it further.
Can you do it with a much lower dose of myeloablation, like much lower doses of busulfan plus 80 antibody drug conjugate?
So that's probably what might happen, is that we may be able to give less chemotherapy, but unfortunately, with that, there's an actual formula like cyclophosphamide equivalence of how much is too much for testes and how much is too much for ovaries, right? So we actually know stuff like that. But it is possible that we may have to end up doing some combination of antibody and chemotherapy. But fertility is certainly a major priority.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good segue into what my next question is for you, which is 10 years from now, what does curative therapy look like in your ideal world?
It's difficult to make predictions, especially about the future, right?
Of course.
The fascinating thing is when I talk to people about gene therapy, which is taking your own stem cells, blood-making stem cells, and genetically manipulating it and transplanting them back to you. I've had patients who had no idea what transplant was, who came to the consult thinking that they have to bring a donor from the street somehow. They have to go find them. Wow. And they're speaking a foreign language and there's an interpreter.
Yeah.
And 15 minutes into the conversation, they pick up on the fact that, I don't need to put somebody else's cells in my body. That's got to be better than putting somebody else's cells in my body. So intrinsically, it makes a lot of sense if we can actually take the blood-making stem cells and fix them. And that technology is not that far. Okay, so the technology of taking a blood-making stem cells, the clinical trials are already beginning, of actually correcting and not just adding a gene, not just turning on the fetal hemoglobin, but actually fixing your sickle cell mutation in your stem cells. Yeah. So that, I think we will know in 3 to 5 years how that is going. The second part is, how much do you have to fix? Well, now there are drugs where you can take the blood-making stem cell and multiply it. Okay, so that's already been done in clinical trials. So if you didn't get a lot of, correction, you could take the corrected stem cells and expand them. Okay, you can grow them and you can keep them growing, because guess what? If you needed to do it again, it's sitting there. So there's that. Then the piece is, can we do this without chemotherapy? That's the big unknown, right? So these things are in clinical trial for other disorders. So one of these days, somebody's going to figure this out. So if everything works out well, nothing turns out, like we plan, right? Life doesn't pan out that way. Yeah. That in 10 years, there's a very good possibility that we will be doing mostly autologous transplants. Transplants not from somebody else. Because I tell my administrators that your whole model is got to change now. This has got to be auto transplant. If you're giving less conditioning regimen, you maybe don't have to admit people in the hospital for that long. And, there's a difference when you do gene therapy and you use your own cells. You don't have 6 months and 8 months of immune suppression. So this goes back to something I read in the beginning of my journey, in 1993, that, an intern diagnoses sickle cell disease and schedules a gene therapy for tomorrow morning.
Oh, wow.
So, it must have been a poet who came up with this. They're far ahead of reality. But it could be that this whole concept of living with sickle cell would be so yesterday, just like there's no such thing as living with leukemia anymore. Or living with blindness or deafness, is all going in that same way. So it might really change things, and if we don't make people infertile with chemotherapy, if you don't cause cancer, unfortunately, we can cause cancer. It may be a small risk, but it's a real risk. I think that's where it might go. But at the same time, we might have another dozen drugs.
True.
Right? I mean, who would have thought?
It's
For 25 years, we had one drug. For 1 year, we had two. And then we got two in 1 week.
Yeah.
I felt like I died and gone to heaven. What's going on here?
The November to remember.
Yeah. I still remember the day, November 5th, 2005, when we had an oral iron chelator, because before that we were giving Desferal and trying to learn the technology of making it more palatable. So I think with the number of things that are coming, there will be an active, maybe you don't have to do gene therapy. Maybe there'll be a drug that'll be even easier to do.
Right.
In completely novel ways. And the amount of, it was very depressing 10, 15 years ago to do clinical trials in sickle cell, because trial after trial would go, bust, and we live in a completely different world.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know what we did to deserve this.
Wow.
So that's what I would think in 10 years from now. I usually end my consult with saying, if you want one message about what the doctor said, and that message is one of hope, that this is a very hopeful time, if you're dealing with sickle cell, if you're living with sickle cell, because we have so many options.
I love it. Amazing. I feel inspired.
You asked me to say what we talk about. This is what we talk about.
So Dr. Callahan, do you have anything else that you definitely want to check off our list while we have Dr. Krish?
We could probably talk all day.
Forever.
But we'll definitely have to have you back on the podcast and do some more of this. But
I want to do something before we go. I want to do a rapid fire session with you.
Okay.
Are you up for it?
I am.
Okay. Dr. Callahan, I'm going to try this. Let's see how this goes, okay? I think Dr. Krish is the right person to try this on.
All right.
All right, here we go. Are you a morning person or a night person?
Morning.
Coffee or tea?
Tea.
What's your favorite movie?
Oh, The Man from La Mancha.
Oh, okay.
It's a direct link to sickle cell.
Some Don Quixote, huh?
Yes.
What's your favorite dessert?
Oh, God. Any ice cream.
Okay, fair enough. Is there a city you haven't visited that you would like to?
No, I've been everywhere.
Best answer you can have. What do you usually eat for breakfast?
Cereal of any kind.
Okay. Can you cook? And if so, what do you cook best?
Oh, I cook whatever my wife teaches me. So I'll cook quinoa. I'll make vegetables. I can make plenty of vegetables. I'm vegetarian, so it's pretty straightforward. So.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Okay. I'm going to ask you a tougher one. Pittsburgh or Atlanta?
Oh.
Hawks or Steelers?
So can I answer a question in more than one word?
Yeah, sure.
So Pittsburgh is the friendliest place on earth that you can. It's beautiful. It's cold. It's like Minneapolis with hope. And it's just, I think when I came to visit you all in Detroit, it's what Detroit would want to be, and it probably is. The the rejuvenation that's happened.
We're getting there.
You're getting there. I really believe so. Atlanta, the absence of snow is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
When it snows in Chicago, it rains in Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
When there's a hurricane in Florida, it rains in Atlanta. That's all happens.
Mm-hmm.
It's just amazing. I really love that. Just the impact of the Black middle class in Atlanta is really impressive. And it's very striking. And you don't see that in too many places in the Midwest or any other place. And I think that, I work in a great place with lots of, and I've had wonderful times in both the institutions. So long answer, sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. So a few more. Window or aisle seat?
Aisle. Stretch out my legs. There's nothing to look outside anyway.
Is there something that you can't do that you'd like to learn to do?
I am actually learning and teaching Sanskrit.
Look at that.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
I teach Sanskrit 5 hours a week.
Wow.
And so I just like to learn more languages, many more languages.
I love that.
speak, several Indian languages, but, I could connect English and Sanskrit. It's an Indo-European language. It's a Proto-Indo-European language.
I love that.
So I'd like to learn German. I'd like to learn Farsi because there's all of these languages are connected.
All right, the last one is not a rapid fire one, but this is one that I want to hear from you. If there is one piece of advice that you could go back and give yourself 30 years ago, what would you go back and tell yourself?
Show up on time.
That's the best advice possible. I love it. Dr. Krish, this was just too much fun.
Oh, I loved it. I'm sorry. I just kept chatting and didn't let you
No,
go.
that's
This
fantastic.
was fantastic. We're so proud to be able to call you a colleague. We're so proud that you're part of our provider community. We look up to you in so many ways, and I think the patients are lucky to have somebody with your voice and your passion for them. So thank you for everything you do.
Thank you. It's been a privilege. It's not just something I'm happy about. I'm just grateful every day that I get to do this. So thank you all. Appreciate it.
Wonderful. Well, there you have it, Warriors. Dr. Lakshmanan Krishnamurthy. We call him Dr. Krish. That's all we have for you with this episode. There's nothing more that we can say. Show up on time, guys, and keep living well with sickle cell. We'll catch you next time. Peace. Well, Warriors, we hope that you enjoy this episode, and we really hope that you share this podcast with people you think could learn more about sickle cell disease. Go ahead and share it with your physician. Go ahead and walk into your appointment and say, hey, do you know about this podcast by these two crazy hematologists, Dr. Z and Dr. C? You should go listen to it. Let them know. Drop some knowledge on them too. And, keep living well with sickle cell. Be safe. We'll be back, right, Dr. C?
Yeah, we'll talk to you soon.
All right, guys. Peace.